Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. We were meeting prior to this with the Issaquah Schools Foundation Executive Board, and the content was riveting. We had a great discussion, and so therefore we're a little late, so my apologies. First item on the agenda is for public comment. And as I know I don't think there's any public comment in the room, but you're welcome to do this. This is an opportunity to speak to the board about matters that are not scheduled for action on the agenda. Is there anyone in either the room or online here for public input? Seeing none, we are ready to go to the next item, which is the approval of the consent agenda.
I move the consent agenda be approved as presented.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The motion passes. The next item on the agenda is the establishment of our regular agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
We will move on. So the first item on our general agenda is the board retreat recap. So I wanted to open up. The board met on March 3rd and 4th. I always say there's not a treat in retreat, but it was a treat to spend that much time with my fellow board members and to discuss really important topics from the district's perspective. So I wanted to take this opportunity to let board members share out some things that they might want to talk about from that retreat.
I had taken a few items that I had noted here that I wanted to mention here. I think one of the pieces that was really useful for us, and Director Taylor, I don't know if you would agree too, but UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. I know as being a new school board member in particular, it was wonderful to be able to have really a robust conversation and a good learning around that. And I know that that's really woven into a lot of the conversations we have as a board, and the district talks about that too. So wonderful to have that conversation. I'd also say too, marketing, really to look at our broader marketing plan for the district. Appreciated that as we think about really kind of our communication strategy. Actually, probably should say communication plan over marketing, but tying them together there. But useful really to think about strategically how we're connecting with the community. I think obviously after our last two bond measures, it's good to think about and step back and think about strategically how we're connecting with all members of the community. So I appreciated that conversation too. So I will leave it at that.
AJ.
Yes, I really enjoy the opportunity during our retreats because it's not often we get that kind of time to really delve into topics, that are of some complexity, as Director Coyne was just saying. For instance, UDL, but Universal Design for Learning is new learning for me. So I appreciated that conversation very much. I also, we had the opportunity to hear from some parents in our district with kids receiving special services. And that was a really great conversation to hear about our families and their experiences in the district. And I thought what was really interesting about what they had to say is that we're moving towards more inclusive services and instruction in special services, that it's important to remember that can create some anxiety for our families as well, as they are trying to, incorporate into a new method of teaching, wanting to make sure that their kids are still getting the services that they need. So that really resonated with me. And also the fact that I think the district, sometimes in implementing new things can get out a little bit in front of the communication with our families. So I think there's opportunities for us to make sure that we're communicating those changes with families as we move forward. So that was a really great conversation. A lot of great back and forth, I thought. And then also I too thought the discussion around the comms plan moving forward was very exciting, particularly conversation around new tactics as we think about the changing demographics of our community and how we're going to try to reach those folks and make sure that we're still engaging all the people in our community. So overall, really a great 2 days. And again, just really value having those 2 and 3 hour blocks to delve into those topics. So I look forward to the next.
Superintendent, would you like to share?
I always appreciate longer time to be able to explore topics in a fashion that's, a little bit more informal, so to speak. I mean, it's all a public meeting still, of course, and we did have some attendees from the public for the duration of the 2 days of the retreat. But it's nice to be able to have that conversation and dialogue back and forth between the board and members of the district cabinet team members, cabinet and beyond. And I also want to thank the cabinet team members for all of their work in preparing, because it does take, some time to provide thoughtful materials potentially or information in advance, but also to engage and be in that presence and space with the board. So it was a good conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was well prepared by staff. Thank you. That was really meaningful time for us. And we also had some wonderful executive session time that I know took a lot of staff time as well. There was a lot less treat in that part of the retreat. But I do appreciate the opportunity. And it was interesting because in the end, when we were talking about universal design for learning, how does that weave into multi-tiered systems and support? And then how do we communicate this education jargon, which it is jargon, to the rest of the public? And I think that having a good streamline and being able to see that conversation, and also, Director Mullings has been talking about change management and how do we even improve? Like, we're making changes, which I absolutely love. I think you can't have a strategic plan and really work towards that plan without changing things, right? That's the whole point of it. But as we're doing that change, how can we make sure that we're bringing the community along with us? It was really good to hear from parents, and sometimes they do not have pom-poms and, and cheers for us, but that's how we know where we need to impact our community in a different way. And, they always say monsters hide in the dark. So what we don't know, we can improve. So it's always good to reflect on those things, even when we don't do them as great as we'd like to. So, but thank you for your time. I know it was a lot to be spending 16 hours practically together and taking time out of your job to be able to do that. And I'm sure most of you actually did your job as soon as you got home. So I know it's a very, very tiring time, but it's really great for us to be able to do the work that we need to do here as a board. The next item on the agenda is the work study recap. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we were meeting with the Issaquah Schools Foundation. It has been several years, I don't know how many, since we used to call them linkages when they were under policy governance. I don't know what they're called under coherent governance. Engagement. Well, it was definitely engaging. So we haven't had an engagement with them in quite some time. And so it was really good to hear from their new leadership. I appreciated Director Coyne being able to bring that background, having been a former ISF board member and president. So I just thought this would be a great time to recap our time just an hour ago.
So it was good. I feel like I've spent a lot of quality ISF time of late because I'm going to say the wrong name of the session, Impact and Action meeting. So I attended the Impact and Action meeting just in the last few days, which was a really cool opportunity to get a review of the progress and the performance of some of the programs that their great work in fundraising on behalf of the district supports, and got to see programs at every level, elementary, middle, and high school. And it's just very inspiring to see how that investment and the educators who are asking for programs and putting them in place and making the results real with our students are going. And so to then again have tonight's conversation to have more of their leadership board and talk about how frankly their structure and focus has changed over time, how their participation across the community has changed over time, and that they really are looking to get more people involved in ISF on the board, certainly as donors as well, and have a much broader reach around the community to keep supporting the incredible work that they do on behalf of all of our students. And I think my favorite part was maybe thinking about how do we make sure more people are getting a view into their great work. Obviously, they have their Nourish Every Mind every year, but how do we better incorporate that into our board discussions, and put some of the great work that's happening, that they support all across the district on display in maybe periodic board meetings. So very good conversation, and inspiring just to get different looks at all the great work that goes on across the district.
Director Coyne.
Thank you. I obviously loved it. I love the Issaquah Schools Foundation. It was my first soiree into volunteering for the district back in fall of 2012 when my kids were very little. And, as I mentioned to our partners with the Issaquah Schools Foundation this evening, the foundation plays a really unique role in our district in helping to really support innovation, supplement funding, and I think in many ways too, really be this positive cheerleader for the district. And I think that that's really important. And the foundation has always played that role. And I look forward, as Director Mulling said, to really continue to partner with the School Foundation, see how we can help each other and give them more opportunity to really speak about some of the great work that they're doing, potentially even during board meetings. And just a quick plug, Nourish Every Mind, their big annual event is coming up on Thursday, May 1st. So hopefully many of our members of our community will be there. So, yes, tickets are, yes, registration opens on Monday. Yes, St. Patrick's Day.
I'll just emphasize the same points. There's so many great programs that are funded in our district because of ISF. And I just do hope we can find a way to really shine a light on those things, because I just think a lot of folks you can end up taking that for granted, not realizing where that funding is coming from for some of the things that your kids are participating in. So I do hope that we can continue to work together and shine a light on those programs, because I think it'll be eye-opening for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think as they mentioned some of those items, such as even helping with teachers that wanted to start a zoology class and a geology class down at Liberty, you would think that those are just district directed, but it's the partnership. It's the fact that staff is meeting with ISF on a regular basis, that they're making sure that they're in alignment. That to me is very important. They're a huge partner with us. And much to what Director Coyne was saying, there's innovation that we as board directors would not want to necessarily risk those dollars in our, we're looking at tax dollars. And is that the right risk to take? And is that the right curriculum? Those can be really expensive decisions if you're doing it for the entire district. And to be able to have somebody who will fund a pilot in 5 classrooms so that we can see what results might be is very, very helpful, because that's work that we wouldn't be able to do. So I think continued funding of that, and then hearing how the lives of students are actually changed by the work that they do. And they have such a long history of doing that. And we've taken some of that away. I didn't really bring it up at the time, but we've taken away some of the things that they pointed to, like these are programs that we fund, voice mentoring. They initiated that. And so the district now does that work because it's important work. But I think it lost the highlight that there was actually the community saying, we need this. And then the community was finding the volunteers to do that. So I think they're great partners, and I want to see their work flourish. And I think that is really important. So it was a good chance to meet with them. Also to hear that some of their executive board had younger students, because that was my biggest fear, is that as things drop off, do you lose those up and coming new parents that are coming through our system? Superintendent.
The Issaquah Schools Foundation has been such an incredible partner to the school district over decades, and coming out of the pandemic where there was just a dip in lots of things, involvement, engagement, all of it. They're really starting to see it uptick again in terms of engagement and participation. And so we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to encourage that, because the more people that are involved in supporting our students, the better. And as a reminder, what was talked about was the Issaquah Schools Foundation also fills a gap, because we don't get the same level of funding that would meet all the needs of our students. So they play a particular role in helping to fill funding gaps, and take that work on a local level, which is what the funding model in Washington State requires, local funding. So one of the things that Director Mullings mentioned, I wanted to put some specifics on it, but the Impact in Action event highlighted several different specific programs that were having an impact. And again, everything is through the lens of, is there measurable progress and results on behalf of the students? So the first one that was highlighted last week was a community-based homework club that was serving students at Endeavor Elementary School. And you saw great examples of those students just receiving incredible after-school homework support and snacks as well, because you always need snacks at elementary school. And then the Buddy Hall program is at Beaver. You need snacks all the time, yes. But the Buddy Hall program, named after Buddy the Bulldog at Beaver Lake Middle School, was highlighted, and that happens within the school day. And then there's an ISF tutoring program at Skyline High School. And so each effort really showed so much results, and specifically not just academic results for students that might need extra help, but also just student confidence and lots of student engagement. So those are just some examples I thought would be helpful to highlight.
I would just like to add on the first program you mentioned, it was Endeavor. At Endeavor School, that I was really taken by the fact that that program is not happening at school. It's happening within the community that those students live in. And I thought that in and of itself makes it very unique, but that they're creating an entire additional community there of students who will come into the program later. So they get to see some of the little siblings, students who've moved on to middle school. And so it was just really special to see those members of the community, members of the staff being able to go into the community in that way. It was pretty cool.
I always assume people are hopefully listening out somewhere about this, but I wanted to do one quick plug about the Issaquah Schools Foundation specifically. So, it is unique to Issaquah. I think sometimes if you haven't been in any other district, you might just think, oh, every district has a school foundation, and they don't. Very few actually do. And the Issaquah Schools Foundation has been one of the most active in the state of Washington, and has also been really looked at nationally by other active school foundations. So it really is a testament to our foundation, our community, and why it's so important to continue to support that great organization and continue to really build that partnership. So thought I'd give that perspective too.
Great, thank you. And I appreciated the opportunity to meet with them. Hope we will not wait 4 years for the next one. And definitely we'll see you all there on May 1st at the Issaquah Community Center at noon. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the works in progress. So Superintendent, what are the wonderful things going on in the district?
All right, I'll highlight a few things. Earlier this week, Martin Turney, Jason Morse, Tom Mullins, and I met with the city manager, deputy city manager, and parks director from the city of Sammamish to discuss ongoing opportunities to work together and provide updates about our respective work. In addition, on Monday, I attended a convening hosted by the University of Washington for superintendents. I've spoken about this before. I've had 2 different convenings with them, one earlier in July, one in the fall, and we will be continuing that work. And the focus is really about how to shift the resource-based funding model in Washington State to a student-based funding model. That's a very long-term aspiration. But right now, we know that the prototypical model right now is based on staffing ratios versus on student allocations. And so all these other student allocations get kind of added on in some sort of different fashion. And most states across the country have already moved towards a more student-based funding model. Some recent states that have done that shift have been including Tennessee, Colorado, and Mississippi. So we got to hear a little bit more about those states as well, and the history of the current funding model in Washington State. So It was just a really good opportunity to continue to deepen our learning and to continue to figure out how, as we know, funding is a constraint right now in our state, how resources can best be utilized. So it's really about learning right now with a long-term, hey, how can the model change to better meet the needs of all of our students? Also this week, we brought together all of our administrators for our monthly leadership meeting. Thank you to Dr. Bailey for holding that space and stewarding that space on behalf of our entire cabinet team, for our other administrators across the district. And at this meeting, we focus on the strategic plan priority area academic opportunities. And our administrators facilitated 6 student panels. So all the high schools were represented, and including Maywood Middle School and Pine Lake Middle School, and for the rest of the administrators. And these 30 students broke up into these 6 panels into 6 different locations, and they shared their experiences about what works and what doesn't work at the transition points of elementary to middle and middle to high school. And then following some, sharing of some reflection questions of that, what works and what doesn't work, as well as advice or new ideas, we moved into a joint collaboration or design sprint between students and administrators to say, what would we then do potentially? And Dr. Bailey opened up and said, and reminded everyone, hey, we've been doing the transitions the same for 20 years. And it's time to just look and see what we can do differently, but just ask our students how they experience that in a way that gives us some good insight. So I'll share some of those insights tonight. At the middle school level, we heard students needing just logistics help on day 1. So they do go earlier through web to see the school and to just check things out, but they don't yet have their schedule, so they aren't able to map their walking path from point A to point B to point C, knowing which classroom they'll be in. So there's just some practical things about logistics that could help with either maps, lockers, and actual practice once you have your schedule. There's the jump to doing homework where you're more accountable to what that homework might mean, and thinking about that stamina and the management of assignments. I know this board talks a lot about executive function skills, so that is a jump going from elementary school where homework is, and we know from our prior work over the years that homework at elementary school is not an optimal thing for learning. So we're not prioritizing homework at the elementary level, but then you're jumping to having to do homework at the middle school. So how that on-ramp happens, how they manage their assignments as well. And then just on-ramping for kids who might come in the middle of the year or potentially at different grades in the middle of middle school. At the high school, there's a lot of discussion around really looking up to older students and upperclassmen and really how that's such an important part of transitioning to high school. Looking right now, because course selection is happening, more assistance with course selection and personalized advice. And at all levels, there was a desire for more personalization and true appreciation. Mr. Gillingham at Maywood Middle School got several shout outs for his support directly, and appreciation when that happens for kids. They remember all of that, and they really appreciate when teachers show up for them in those ways that really personalize the support and guidance. And then what was great is we got an email after the fact, and several students, as they were departing, making their way back to school, as well as just overall following up the next day, they had so much joy and appreciation for being able to speak to our adults who are in charge of the entire system, for having them there and hearing them. So that was pretty powerful. I'm going to continue on the theme of students because that's really so much fun. Today I met, and I told the group this earlier today, I said, this was the joy of my day, although it's also joyous to be here with you all tonight. As with the Issaquah Schools Foundation and all of it. But I met with 14 student leaders across Issaquah, Liberty, and Skyline High Schools, and we talked about what they're proud about for themselves. And that was actually my introductory question. Like, what are you proud about yourself? Not, what are you good at? Like, what sports do you play? Like, what are you proud about yourself? And that really, I think, is not a question we ask each other enough. And then we just talked about what's happening about in their schools and what they think about as leaders, like what's occupying their mind. So it was a really organic conversation, and there's some question and answer time. But some of the things that came out and stood out to me were that students are proud when they think about their own individual self, about their ability to form strong connections and relationships with others and with those from different backgrounds. There's a universal kind of pride in their individual ability to adapt to new situations, use their critical thinking skills. Someone actually said, I love that I'm smart. And I thought that was so cool because it just shows confidence and just, knowledge of self. Someone talked about how they love about their own authenticity. They're like, I'm nervous right now, but I just am. And so I'm really confident in that, who they are and showing up. And they talked a lot about how they're proud about their sense of empathy and how they want to include others. So as leaders, as you can imagine, that translated into how they're thinking about engaging other students to make sure everyone feels welcomed, affirmed, and included at their school site, and fostering a strong sense of community and pride and sense of unity. And really looking at knowing that students all engage in different ways. So it's not one way that happens how you can engage in a school community. And then talking about some examples where those leaders, the student leaders, are aligning their strengths with their leadership. They came up with some really tangible examples that were just so consistent with what they were saying about what they were proud of about themselves and what they thought about as leaders. Like there are mirror messages posted at Skyline that are positive and affirming around the school. And at Liberty, they're mentors for new students that come and enter the school at different grade levels or times of the year. And then at Issaquah High, I learned that the ticket price, 2/3 of the ticket price, is going to the American Cancer Society. So some really great things that are happening across our district that show the incredible, amazing heart and values of our students. And it was just so joyous. So I had to just extend that out and share that because I feel like getting out the stories of our students is super important to me. And I want to make sure that people hear that. And we're very fortunate to have such amazing young people.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the board? Okay, our next item on the agenda is a monitoring report, operational expectation 16 equity. And the administration is going to be, were we going to hear from students first?
Yes, I think we have our
After you have your motion.
students.
Oh, after I have my motion, that's right.
Oh,
I move the board accept the monitoring report of OE 16 equity as presented.
Second.
Okay, now we will have our student presentations. Oh, we'll do staff first.
yeah,
That
I
would be
think,
very
I
helpful.
think we have a delayed arrival. Okay, so we're switching things up. Sorry
Perfect.
about that. So I'll welcome up Elena Sivaдаsan and Donna Hood. And I'll wait till they're here and I'll open up with a couple points. All right. I will open up with a few points and I'll have you join in. So just really incredible work over the years. Just this monitoring report, I think, reflects the culmination of so many years worth of investments, really, aligned with the policy here, but also our own conviction around what's right for our students. And right now, I think we can really focus on intentional conversations and learning experiences that really translate into practice in our day-to-day work. Our commitment to our students, remains unwavering, based on all individual backgrounds, cultures, and unique identities that everyone brings to the table. And so our commitment both to excellence and equity, full stop, is just what we will continue to do because it's the right thing to do. And so I'm so grateful that this policy exists, but also grateful that this is an opportunity for us to highlight the good work that we are doing. And while we always have ways to improve, because the work on equity is continual work of how we navigate ourselves in the context of a larger society, and that we are people and we're imperfect, but this policy does hold us accountable to continuing to deepen and foster that work in meaningful ways across the entire district, and to bring forward data, both quantitative and qualitative, to be able to discuss where we are making progress and where we need to also make further progress. So you'll see continued improvements from our end in terms of progress in not only the format and content, but also I think you'll see some connections to the work in the strategic plan, as equity is really embedded in all aspects of the strategic plan. And you'll see, I think, a movement away from more technical things that we've been doing that had sort of laid a foundation to more adaptive work that's, leading to hopefully deeper change within us as individuals, then also as a collective. With that, I will pass it over to my team.
Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Donna Hood.
Elena Sivaдаsan, Executive Director of Equity, Belonging, and Family Partnerships. So good evening, school board members and superintendent. I know the board has had an opportunity to review OE 16, and I wanted to share a few highlights from this monitoring report before we move into any questions tonight. The first highlight I would like to talk about is our efforts last year with recruitment and retention. Our human resources department continues to make strides in their efforts to recruit a diverse workforce. This has been achieved through increased recruitment opportunities at multiple job fairs, digital connections with historically Black colleges and universities, and partnerships with our communication department. Additionally, retention opportunities have been enhanced through the Educators of Color Leadership cadre offered in collaboration with the Puget Sound Educational District. This district initiative provided educators of color with leadership professional development, celebrations of their work, and opportunities for connection both within the building and throughout other districts. Furthermore, our educators of color, as well as our staff that identify as LGBTQIA, have actively contributed to our Equity Advisory Committee. Their leadership has led to the creation of affinity spaces, professional development for staff, and valuable input into the content of the district's STAY survey for certificated staff. I would also like to highlight our efforts in community partnerships and family engagement. During the 23-24 school year, we were able to organize more than 19 engagement events for families covering topics such as Canvas, attendance, student supports, Running Start and WANIC, and financial aid. Our Family Partnership Advisory Group has also played a crucial role in providing feedback and facilitating two-way communication on important issues like elementary report cards, the bond, attendance, student conflict, and student reports. This has resulted in parents feeling engaged, heard, and valued, as well as additional parent engagement events during this school year. We have also strengthened our community partnerships with organizations such as the Circle, the Garage, the YMCA, the Issaquah Nourishing Network, PTSA, and ISF. And these collaborations have provided valuable resources and support to our students and families. Lastly, I'd like to highlight our efforts in professional development. Our professional development initiatives have been robust, systemic, and interconnected across multiple departments. This approach helps ensure that our efforts are cohesive and aligned with our district priorities. OE 16 is also unique in that it has around 16 voices. And so our cabinet team has worked very hard to refine our approach in how we communicate our work in the monitoring reports, moving away from to-do lists to focusing on key highlights, overall purpose, and areas of growth or next steps. So now I'd like to open it up to the school board. We welcome any questions you have.
So do we have our student? Do we have our student yet? Okay. Okay, the show must go on. Yes, so I will open it up to board questions or comments.
I have a couple questions, if that's okay. And again, the reports themselves always get better. The one graphic that I guess I just don't understand what it's telling me is it's page 8 and it's the TFI subscale report. And I just honestly just couldn't sort out what it was sharing.
We were potentially preparing for that question. So
Okay.
Dr. Dana Bailey is here to share
Sure.
why this is included and additional information.
No, I'm good. The culture responsive TFI is an activity that our district has elected to do every other year as a check or a measure on how successfully we are implementing the MTSS structures and the tiered structures. So what you should take from this is the elementary schools are farther ahead than the middle schools and high schools in implementation, and many of the schools are at what we call fidelity or 80%. So if you're looking at the 80% line and above, that's the success mark. And if you're looking at the approaching 80%, that's work in progress. And now we've done it twice. So you might have some schools who have completed the culturally responsive TFI twice. And that's what it's talking about. It's checking our implementation of the tiered system.
So the bars, like they both are kind of purple to me. So the blue, each of those is a school?
No, it's really hard to read it. I'm sorry. The first bar is on their teaming structures. The second is on implementation. Then you have evaluation. So if you could see this in the chart, it comes out of the PBIS website this way. And I can find that. I maybe get you a better exemplar. What this is telling us is we are underway, and there are six elements that you're evaluated on in the TFI. Elementary schools have done it more, middle schools have done it once, and high schools have done a different high school tool. But it's meaning to tell you that we are implementing with fidelity in some places. And the teams is where the teaming structures are where we're doing some of the best. The interventions and the self-evaluation is right there. And I think you see at the top, in 2023, the N was 16. So that's the 16 elementary schools who did it the first time by them. We did just the elementary schools this way.
Okay, but the takeaway from these is that we have a system or an approach in which to evaluate how we're doing at implementing and executing, I guess for lack of a better word, the MTSS tiers of support.
Right. It's the creation of the systems that are consistent across all 16 schools, 16 elementary schools, and now have done it exactly one time across the 6 middle schools about how we are doing at building the system, the structure,
Okay.
the framework, sometimes we say, for MTSS. So I think you could take away, we're on our way. Not there yet, but we're on our way.
And so we've done 16 schools so far. So then maybe the only other question I have is under school year 2022 to 2023, where it has an N of 26.
Sure.
What
I'm
is
so
the
glad you caught that.
26.
You are speaking my language. So that year we did tier 1, a CRTFI at tier 1 for all the elementary schools, and a CRTFI for tier 2 at the schools who felt like they were ready for it.
Now I'm reading the chart. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Um,
Point.
Thank you. Great information and very comprehensive report. One of the things that I'll just highlight is kind of a comment when I look at page 13. I love how the report just broadly speaks to access and community and parent engagement. And on 13, it just speaks to the broader community partnerships that we really cultivated as a district. And I think oftentimes members of the community will go to the school as the first resource for something. And so it really is upon the district to be able to bring in those partners and introduce those partners to our families. So I love that the district's doing it. And we it also shows too, we don't have to go at it alone. We have individuals who can help us who are experts in these spaces. So I thought I'd just call that out. I also think too, one of the things that's interesting in here that's kind of embedded, but some other really cool things. And I look at like transportation, for instance, the purchase of those ORCA cards so that students at the secondary level can participate in after school activities. I think the food services piece, the breakfast program, speaking, I'll tie it back to the Issaquah Schools Foundation, but I remember years ago, we were helping the district to pilot that program and and it was the breakfast bar program at the time. I know it's obviously expanded out, but you look at those numbers. I mean, the breakfast program, it's expanded, I know this year or this past year, but 43,848 breakfast meals, and then 30,101 were free. And those were kids who it's free because they needed nourishment, they needed food, and it was important that they got that. So I just thought I'd pull that out too. It's pretty cool numbers when you see that and what the district is broadly, how they're serving students. So thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to start off first with just a comment about, particularly in the current political environment, reaffirming my own, and I hope our board's unwavering commitment to these equity values that are, in this report. And, they're central to our mission. And I think that is really shown in this report because we're seeing lots of great outcomes, I think, from the OE16 work. Things such as, their expansion and inclusionary practices, improvement of outcomes for kids with special services, recognizing implicit bias and discipline and all of those things, really, really great and encouraging to see. And also I'm very encouraged by the increased use of data and the agile tools now for the district to access data to help kind of make these decisions. I think that's probably the next step in the maturity, is to then start to use that data in very objective ways. But overall, I just wanted to comment on those kind of themes that I saw that I think are really great. And we're seeing that even in the SIP plans. We're seeing the schools really lean into the data as well. So that's great. Had a couple questions. I had a conversation about 2 years ago, actually at Skyline, with a group of LGBTQA students. And they had mentioned at the time that there were a couple instances where they felt like staff was ill-prepared to really deal with situations that may have come up. So I was really encouraged to see the LGBTQA training. I'm curious though, am I correct? This is the first year for that?
Last year was the first year for it. We continued it again this year.
Okay.
And one of the highlights was that we also included students in the creation of the video, and they're featured in the video as well.
Okay, that's great, because I did pick up on the fact that it was created by the district essentially. So that's great. I've just was encouraged by that. I will say I have a question about a graph as well, which is the graph on page 10, which has to do with equity allowance. I got to tell you what, I did not understand the graph at all. So if you guys could just give me some context as to what I can take from this, I would appreciate it. And what is equity allowance? Because I didn't understand that.
I might invite Susan Mundell to come up.
We also thought that there might be a question about this chart. So thank you for asking it.
Yeah.
The equity allowance was first put in this chart to show basically a range that was allowed in the disproportionality for the highly capable program. So it was to show that 20% above or 20% below was within an equitable range. I think that this chart doesn't show that 20% allowance. So I think perhaps that line should have been crossed out.
Okay, yeah, 20% above or below what exactly though? What is is there a baseline measure of some sort?
To where it is in line with the percentage of all students. So for the BIPOC line there, 15%, 20% above or 20% below would be the equitable allowance.
I see. Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yes.
So I'd like to go back to the comments you made on hiring, which of course I had gone to before that last. So what I thought was great to see is one that we've continued some of the additional hiring practices. So where we're hiring from, having broadened some of the reach of our recruitment efforts, which is great. And it seems like we continue to make progress in the staffing numbers, increased staffing numbers you mentioned. What's interesting is you call out that you're still using the relocation guide, which was one that we had talked about, I don't know, 2 years ago, right? One of the challenges that people have moving, particularly for African American people, moving into this part of the country is a lack of resources available that you'd find in more urban centers. I'm actually curious to know what the feedback on that has been. Is there a positive reaction to having that relocation guide?
Yeah, mostly anecdotally and
Mhm.
face to face at the recruiting events. Some students and graduates or recent graduates, alumni even who are coming back to a fair a year later say, "Oh, this is so great."
Yeah.
And that's about as far as they take it, but they walk away with it in their hands and really like having a sense of what's available to them in the community. And I think it does paint a nice picture of how diverse it is here in East King County and
Yeah.
all of the opportunities that we have in this area. It's a huge selling point. I think our community is a big part of the draw for our incoming staff.
Yeah, I just will stay with that because having been an adult who moved their whole family here, had family members not move here, really, there are indicators in communities that are welcoming or not welcoming. And frankly, the ability to see that the district itself would provide a guide of, oh, there are houses of worship that are of a various group. There are places to buy food that I may not have imagined are in some of communities. There are, I don't know, I think we included, I remember houses of worship, hairdressers. I know I sent a list
Yes.
at one point. That was my first question upon moving here, like, can I get my hair
Mhm.
done?
And cultural
this area.
institutions, other places like
Yeah,
that too.
things like that. And so I will always reinforce as someone who actively asked those questions before agreeing to move to this part of the country, that those are not small indicators. And they're ones that really do differentiate what we're doing to recruit here versus other organizations who do not think of those sorts of things.
I'm glad that we're still on this one. So I just wanted to talk about, I know that we are doing a lot of the things that are primarily for determining who participates in highly capable, and really this is around who's going to be in our service, our pull-out services or our self-contained services, correct? That as far as highly capable. And so I think it's interesting that we have an even greater disparity than we had 10 years ago. And so I'm just curious, we're doing all of the things that I'm currently on the advisory committee for OSPI for highly capable. And we're doing all of the things that they're trying to advise other districts and really put in as the recommendations. I don't know if we're doing one thing that is being recommended, which is no student can be unqualified for a single low score. If that makes any sense. I know there's a lot of double negatives. But let's say you have a student that gets a 95 and 97 and then like a 92, that we can't unqualify them for that 92. I don't know if we're doing that because I know my son was unqualified for that and I had to go through a whole process. And then
We changed that process a while back. We now have a different process that allows for a Z score. And I'm trying to remember because I haven't been in charge of the highly capable program for a while, but it allows some scores to be high and some scores to be low. You don't have to meet a threshold on every single test, so long as in the end, your score is within a certain range. And there's also been other procedures put in place that allow for some professional judgment and that sort of thing. And when the students test, those are the students who receive the designation of highly capable. And we are always looking for ways that we can serve other students through challenge groups at this point, guests coming to the services, that sort of thing. So while you have to take the test and the laws say we have to identify people and label them as such. We're trying and continuing working on new ideas for expanding access to some of these services.
Do you know if there's been any research? Because I think this has been the case for decades. And one of the reasons that I really got interested in education was the sense that, especially for our twice exceptional students, right? So if they're highly capable, but they're also on an IEP or a 504 is where the real struggle comes. And so when we look at disproportionality in our special education, then it's not surprising if there's disproportionality in our identification of highly capable. And is there research going on at least to be able to say, what do we really mean by highly capable and how can it be determined? And I feel sorry for your cough because I've been doing it all day. So
Could you just repeat the final question?
really around, is there research to be able to find something? Because I think our current system, I'm looking at our data, is actually going much more towards the students that are going through pre-planned testing where they're literally going to school on the weekends so that they can qualify for the test. And that is, so I'll say it, I've said it 1,000 times. We do not have a highly capable program. We have a highly productive program. And so how do we get, so is there research? Because clearly we're not getting to it, but I think that's because we're doing what's told to be said. Is there research out there? Are they finding other ways to really say, what are we identifying as highly capable?
We do know about that dynamic within our own community of students prepping for the tests for highly capable. We have been working to eliminate that as best we can. We now use the iReady test as one of our achievement indicators instead of a separate test that can be prepped for. And as far as research, yes, I believe Dr. Reinvan is aware of a lot of research in that regard. She actually did her doctoral dissertation with enrichment, things like that. And as I mentioned, we are currently, thinking of different ways that we can expand, make the program better so that it is not just a production program, but really more of a program of thinking and learning or advancement.
I will add that, I think it would be a welcome conversation to do more dialogue about how we identify the unique strengths that each child brings, because they also might spike in one area, to your point around not being unqualified based on one lower area relative to a very high area. And I think we have a desire to talk more, and I know that there's some things changing potentially on a state level, which I know you're President Moraldo involved in. I think we have a deep interest in exploring further how we can expand advanced and accelerated type opportunities for students based on their individual and or unique strengths. It is I think would be a passion of ours as an administration to be able to engage in that kind of a dialogue further, because I think your questions reveal that we have your interest, but also on behalf of the board, but also our own interest as well.
We welcome it.
Yeah, and those tests that I was speaking to, and again, yeah, so we're rewriting the WACs. Literally, I'm sorry I missed the meetings today because I think we're getting pretty close to being done. But from top to bottom, the Washington, I don't know what WAC means off the top of my head. I should after 16 years. But it's the Washington something code, but it's the codes that we go by. But what they're talking about is within the same subject area, we usually give 3 different tests. And if there's one low score on that test out of the 3, that they can't just be booted for one low test.
Right.
So
we don't have that.
Okay.
We did have that in the past, but we don't have that
Okay.
anymore.
And that was my question.
Okay.
And then I think we still want to hear from the students, and the board may still have questions for you and or students afterwards. So I hope that's okay. Welcome to our student reps who gave great reports to us. So the board has read the reports that were sent in, but we look forward to hearing from you more directly.
I'll wait for everyone to be up here before we start.
Yeah, I think this was like a whole group. I
Yeah.
think, and Marcel, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of times we say, well, what are the ones you're interested in? And then all the students choose the same one. And then no one chooses finance except for last year, right?
First year.
Yeah, our first year,
our
we
first
did.
year.
Yeah,
Our first year, we had all the finance ones. Jack.
that's right, Jack.
Okay. Hello. I will be presenting the equity report for Issaquah High School. I sent out a Microsoft Forms survey to all IHS students through Canvas Global Announcements, and the survey was available to students from February 13th to 23rd. And a majority of this period aligned with Issaquah School District's second winter break. So then my survey collected a total of 190 responses. This is lower than some of the previous surveys we've sent out. It's around 7% of the students at Issaquah High School. All the respondents were anonymous. And my survey had a total of 17 questions, with several of them being optional, free response. And so I will go through and break down some of them. It's also important to note that because this is a voluntary response survey, that the respondents will tend to feel more strongly about the topic than what the general student body likely feels. So when you're applying it to the greater IHS population, please take it with a grain of salt. Starting off, I had question 4. Do you feel that Issaquah High School recognizes the existence of systemic and institutional inequities? My questions were, my multiple choice questions were structured differently this time, by the way. So multiple choice, there were 3 options for a majority of questions. Yes, most definitely, no, definitely not, and somewhere in between. I allowed free response sections for students that answered no, and somewhere in between, because I was looking for areas where ISD can improve. So to question 4 about asking whether Issaquah High School recognizes the existence of systemic and institutional inequities, 45% said yes, most definitely. That's great. 46% said somewhere between, and 9% said definitely not. What stood out to me about this section is that a lot of students mentioned a few instances of racism, or like languages that are less recognized that they speak and would like to see represented in our school. One student responded in the free response section. I believe the school recognizes the issues that are brought to its attention, but like other places, it takes an individual to push for the school to act on them. I believe that the school doesn't actively go after inequities. They go by the rule of, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. That's unfortunate, because we do see a lot of behind the work stuff that's going on here in the district. But if some of our students aren't seeing that carried out within our schools, I think there's some improvement to be done there. Another question that I felt I wanted to share today was question 10. Do you feel that the curriculum taught at school focuses on diverse viewpoints and understanding different cultures? And something that stood out to me here was, and I don't think this has happened or occurred in any of my surveys before, but there were 3 students in the free response section that showed that they felt the curriculum at IHS is very liberal/democratic and fails to explore the conservative perspective. One student said they refuse to see the conservative viewpoint in a good light. And I think in such a polarized political environment that we live in today, it's important that we have spaces where we can freely discuss our own ideologies and what we're hearing outside of school, and find ways to come to terms with each other and understand each other. So this is something I wanted to point out. Also, like many of our equity surveys before, students mentioned that the curriculum at IHS is largely Eurocentric, and that there isn't enough diversity, but there were some students that suggested that that there is a good curriculum that isn't Euro-focused. And they suggested using translated works from other countries in some of their classes in order to gain those other viewpoints. I know I'm taking quite a bit of time, and we have other responses to go or other surveys to go through. So I'll just skip to question 17, my very open-ended free response section, asking all student respondents, do you have anything else you'd like to share? In this section, one student stated, "Nothing I have shared is meant to display the school in bad light. I just wanted to share my personal experience, and I have personally really struggled in my time at the school and would like others to have more support in the future. I love my teachers and am incredibly lucky to have had the opportunity to be a student here." And the student that shared this response is a senior. So in conclusion for my report, I know we all know that Issaquah School District is doing the very best that they can do to make sure that our students can go through our system and what they experience is positive, and that they have that our schools are practicing equity and inclusivity. However, I believe that there are still many communities and groups within our school that we have not been able to connect with and communicate with as effectively as others. So I believe that there's still much work to be done for this OE. Thank you.
All right. I'm Hava Alcorn. I'm from rep from Gibson Neck, and I am standing in for Milo, who can't be here tonight. The Gibson Neck survey got 70 student responses, which is 35% of Gibson Neck's total oh my goodness, Gibson Neck's total student population. And every question but one got 70% of students' positive feedback, and most of these questions were asked on a Likert scale. One question that did not get majority positive feedback, it was 50% yes and 50% neutral or no, was in Gibson Neck, diversity and inclusion are valued and intentionally practiced. And Milo said, after speaking to students and reading the comments in the short response questions, the responses seem to be due to lack of cultural diversity in Gibson Neck. We're a majority white school with almost 70% of our students being white and all of our teachers being white. And from the data and what students shared, they also don't feel like inclusion is being intentionally pushed. An important thing to note is that our admission process is a lottery and is not selective in that way. Students also had a few comments about bad experiences in regard to a 504 plan or an IEP being respected and followed by teachers and staff. Overall, students feel positively about Gibson Neck creating an inclusive environment, encouraging high achievement and giving equal resources and opportunities to all students, no matter their ethnic background, but also feel like we should be continuously encouraging teachers to learn about IEPs and 504 plans and figure out ways to make students of all ethnicities and races feel intentionally included.
I'm Aditi Marihili, filling in for Krish, who couldn't be here tonight. So for Liberty High School, Krish sent out a survey on OE16 between February 24th and February 28th. It got 259 responses from our school, which is about 17%. And overall, the students at Liberty who responded to the survey felt either neutral or positive about the Issaquah School District's performance in terms of equity. And so one, I guess, overarching theme throughout this report is that diversity goes just beyond races. It also goes into socioeconomic classes. And so that was a huge finding that we found through the survey. So one of the questions that we asked was, or this was on a Likert scale, and it was, I have equitable access to school activities, clubs, and athletics regardless of my background. And several students responded that financial barriers were one limiting factor. Only 47% answered true or very true. And so financial barriers are a huge factor that prevents some students from accessing these resources that other students do have access to. In terms of personal identity, so culture, race, gender, and beliefs, an overwhelming majority of students responded positively to this question. 75% said that they felt that their culture was respected at Liberty. And then in terms of district communication, because I guess communication is another part of equity. We want to make sure that communication goes out to everybody so that they have access to the same materials. So Krish asked, my family is aware of the district and schools communication about things like scholarships, programs, or other educational opportunities. And over 50% did not agree to this statement. And I think that's one point of concern because we want to make sure that our communication is equitable and goes to students of all backgrounds and not just those that either are in higher socioeconomic classes or that are more represented. So overall, there was a general sense of inclusivity in the classroom, but there are areas of improvement that I mentioned. Thank you.
I'm Nila Natarajan, and we collected 105 responses, which is notably lower than past forms that we sent out. But the question that I want to highlight is, do you feel that school staff and administration treat students with respect and fairness? So for this one, our responses kind of gravitated towards most of the time, with about like 51% choosing that option. For this one, written responses revealed that students felt that there was a disconnect between them and many staff, feeling that there was kind of a barrier with student concerns, and when they did try to seek out help or try to ask questions to these teachers, the engagement was limited.
My name is Dashida, and we worked collaboratively on this report. And the next couple of questions I'd like to highlight, they kind of fall underneath like the same category, in which we asked if students feel if they are given enough opportunities to share their opinions on school decisions that affect them, and also if they believe that communication from the administration about important policies and changes is clear and accessible. And something that we saw within the responses for these is that we generally had about 60% falling between yes, almost always, or between most of the time, which is generally positive. And then the rest of the 40% laid between sometimes, rarely, or we had 3% and no, never. And this kind of reveals that students desire a little bit more of an influence on school decisions or just being more aware of them. And something important that I feel that we can highlight in this is students wanted school policy information to be delivered in a more language accessible manner in which they actually understood how the policies would directly impact them. Because even if it is shared, not everyone's able to see exactly how, as a student, this policy is going to be impacting them. So I think just switching up the language to be a little bit more clear would be really important.
The next question that we wanted to highlight is, do you feel that your school promotes a respectful and inclusive environment for all students? For this one, the majority of responses were most of the time and yes, always. Written responses revealed that students felt that although they themselves had not specifically been targeted by any like harmful or things or situations that made them feel unsafe, they did feel that the language that they heard, such as derogatory terms, and their experiences that lack cultural inclusivity made them feel unsafe at times. And even if it wasn't directed towards them, it did kind of change the situation there.
We also asked if the student directly or someone, if they knew, faced challenges in accessing academic support resources at the school. And we had almost 60% saying that no, they didn't face any struggles or know someone who did. And about a quarter of students said yes, they did face it or know someone. And there were about 17% that said not sure. So this kind of shows us that some STEM students face challenges related to the costs of school materials, kind of what Aditi was talking about as well. And students request expansion of free tutoring services and want to ensure that all students are aware of academic support programs. I guess awareness is a big theme that we're seeing popping up, or accessibility as well. And those are the key findings from our report. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, wait, we do have. Yeah. I thought I counted 4. I've been sick, but I can still count. Yeah. That's fine. Thank you for being inclusive. Thank you. So I don't know if the board has questions or comments for the students. Those were really thorough reports. We really appreciate the questions that you asked. Different questions at the different schools, but it really kind of brought out what was happening at each school because you're all different. So yeah.
Question I had, great information. I was taking some notes on this, and one thing I was thinking about just in terms of, because there was a theme, I know it came up at Skyline specifically in terms of voices being heard and wanting to be heard a bit more, and I heard that from the other schools as well. But then I see that the number of students who actually replied to the survey is low. How do we get more students maybe engaged who want their voices to be heard? They're clearly saying that. How do we get more of them to fill out something like this? I'm just curious. Students have any ideas on that? Yeah, are you?
Nilla.
A theme that we kind of saw during our survey and just gathering responses was that a lot of students who did want to share their opinion or have an impact didn't receive information about the kinds of actions that they could do in a timely manner. So I feel like a lot of things that people would have wanted to have an impact on they were just informed about it too late to have an impact.
That's fair.
And Hava.
I think specifically with this survey, there's the survey fatigue is real, and we send out a lot of surveys and the students have to take a lot of surveys. And so the people who you're going to get responding are either bored or really have something to say. And us and the district needs to be more concise about when we use a survey and be more experimental about how we're reaching students and find ways to create spaces where students are encouraged to share those experiences. So.
Aditi.
So for this survey, I think Krish got almost 260 responses, which I might be wrong, but I think that might have been one of the highest number of respondents that we've had from Liberty. And I think one of the strategies that we used was when we did our focus groups to get data for results 2, I'm sorry. We just, at the end of our focus groups, we asked students, have you ever filled out one of those surveys that we've sent out? And most students obviously said no. But there were always a couple in each class that raised their hand that said yes. And so we called on them, we're like, how long does the survey take? And they're like, 1 minute. I think that encouraged a lot of students to actually do it. That's probably one reason that we have so many more responses now than we typically do. But yeah, so I think just getting the message out there that it literally takes 1 minute to share your voice with the district and to actually make an impact might encourage more students to respond to the survey. But like Hava said, her survey fatigue is real. So yeah.
So this isn't OE16 specific, but I do think that like what Hava was talking about with the survey fatigue, one of the biggest contributing factors to that is that I don't think students view surveys as a way to see change within the district. It's kind of hard to make that connection between me sitting here and filling out the survey and then actually seeing my voice implemented or seeing that tangible change. And so I think that one, as student reps, like when we communicate this, it would probably be helpful for us to start saying like, hey, this information is going to be used when the board does decision making on this OE, or highlighting instances where that student input is really valued when it comes to policy making. And then the other thing also, like Aditi was talking about, most of the time when we're made to fill out, and I genuinely say made to fill out surveys and things like homeroom and things like that, they are like significantly longer than the ones that we send out. And so I think distinguishing that like this isn't one of those large screening type surveys, it's just a quick thing, is definitely helpful as well.
I'll go Naomi, Nila, and then Dashida. I thought I saw your hand up.
So with what Aditi and Ava were saying, I feel like it would be a good thing to inform about how they would have that tangible change and how it does just like take a minute. But I feel like a big difference in informing this would be doing it like in person, because although we do put these things in like the messages with our survey, it has a way smaller impact than like, for example, they did it in person, and I feel like that could be seen, their responses went up with that. So if we were going to inform, I think that would be an important thing.
Dishita.
And I think that like not only saying prior to like before they're filling out the survey, like, oh, this is how your voice is going to be important, kind of having like a reinforcement aspect in which after they fill out the survey and we have like our report presented, we could like send kind of like a follow-up email or something like that, be like, oh, like here's the clip of where your voice was important in our report. So kind of they feel or like they're able to witness a little bit of that impact. And I think it creates a association between actually engaging with these surveys that we're sending out.
Hava.
Along with what Deshita was saying, it would also be interesting because sometimes it feels like you put in feedback and then it like slips into the like beast that is administration and then disappears and things happen, but you don't know if anybody actually heard it or if it mattered. And if there's some way that when things change, we can say like, this was like, these are parts of our student feedback that mattered. These are things that we heard from students that mattered, so that students know that it's not just a coincidence and that their feedback actually mattered. And maybe if there's a way that we can organize like, I don't know, like a district listening group on OE16, like not like a complaining room, but like a place where students from all backgrounds and all like can come and share like these are experiences that I've had positive, like where I felt supported and recognized and seen or defended, and negative where I felt alone or afraid or targeted. And for that to be a place where we have students sharing and staff who are listening, and then that can be taken and be a constant monitoring of how this is going. And students can really feel like they're being, I don't know, that was a kind of spitball idea. But.
Well, and we actually have on our agenda that there's during our calendaring time when we're going to have discussions with high school students. And in the past, we've done it specifically while we were developing this OE. Okay, Naomi, now you're going to raise your hand. Okay.
Yeah, I think a resource that we have yet to really utilize in our surveys are our teachers and our like direct staff members in our schools. I know there are definitely teachers, many teachers in my school that are passionate about our students and want to improve our learning environment for those students, especially like our ML students and students who are maybe in guided studies who want more support, students who are in special ed. A lot of our teachers and staff, I think, could push these surveys out or just like ask some of these questions to those students, and just like maybe make note of them in their classes, or at least like encourage them to fill out the surveys that we send out, because I think those teachers can have a big impact on what students are replying and responding to our surveys. And maybe it's not getting more student responses, it's getting more of wider variety of student voices in our surveys. Yeah, that's my point.
So I think for me, it would be interesting to know, you know, especially when you're talking about, hey, what are the actual policy changes that are happening based on this information? How can I tell them back saying, you know, the board is listening to these responses because you're putting in a lot of effort to give us this information, this data, and what are we doing with it? And so I think based on the feedback you received in your surveys, is there any specific actions you think that we might need to take based on some of that? So, you know, would it be like, how do you ensure that what we're doing around curriculum is more welcoming, inviting to other cultures, to other voices? So just really curious quickly about anything that you might have, saying, looking at the data you receive for your school, would there be something that, you know, if you were in a position to speak to policymakers, what policy would you want us to be looking at? Naomi's going for the mic.
Well, I think we're all just thinking right now. But I do want to say that in my report and survey, several students noted that one of my questions was, are your families able to communicate, or do they know how to communicate with the district or school? And a big majority of students either said no, like we've never had or needed to reach out to our district or like our school and ask for something. And then the other majority said when they or their families did reach out to the district or the school or administration, it felt like their emails were lost. They either never got a response or responses were very, very delayed. I think that's a point that I don't know if there's a policy that would align with that, but that's one area that I think a lot of students and families would want to see improvement on in order to increase that connection. And then you can hear more about like where else can we improve? What other policies do we need to implement or whatever? Do any students have thoughts now that I've stalled?
So I think the opportunity that President Moraldo just opened up to you is one of like the continued maturation of what your roles are, right? So I think what you've proven you can do now is reach your student populations. You've proven you can gather information and doing a very nice job of kind of succinctly reporting on what your findings are. I think the opportunity the president's opening up to you is, what does your advocacy look like? Right? And so I think that's a very different step is, okay, I can go from reporting what I hear to what might we actually advocate to be different in the environment. And so I think that's awesome. Like, I love hearing more of the first year voices this meeting. That's awesome. And so I think it's just each time a little bit of what can we actually do, or what can we provide from the seats we're in? And so that might be just, I'm just trying to restate the opportunity that was opened up to you, and to start to think about what that might look and frankly feel like going forward. Because honestly, that's what I'd rather hear. Like, what I hear in your reports tonight is, and what have I been around, 5 years, 6 years now, is actually quite a lot of positive movement in student reaction when we bring up equity. My first year on the board, there was a lot of upset and unrest, a lot of bubbling up of very specific reports of not feeling included. I think that moved into, I heard there's an equity policy, but I don't know what that means. For me, what you guys are saying tonight, while you're hearing this year's results, I'm going over like the trajectory. What I'm getting from your reports is, oh, I hear the report. I'm largely positive about my experiences. Here's some areas we could do different. So that arc for me is a very positive one. We're going in the right direction. But I think, President Moraldo opened up like one more click for you guys in that statement. Is that fair?
So Hava.
I don't have a policy suggestion. I have a question. Since this is about voting on whether or not we feel that this OE has been met, will we have an opportunity to come back to you to do some thinking and maybe some talking with students and come back to you with ideas that we've come up with for policy changes? Because it's kind of hard to do that just on the spot.
Right. I would say if you wanted to come back and reflect on something, maybe later in the year. I'm trying to think about our meetings are pretty tight. Or if you wanted to submit some type of report to us, you guys could do a video of your own together talking about what you've learned from this one, and to consider it now. And it may even reflect on how you ask your questions. Like, oh, this is actually why I'm asking this question, because there might be some policies related to these questions that we need to take a look at. So is it about something like, are we respectful for all student voices? Are we really getting at, we've made so many curriculum changes, so when I hear that they feel it's still Eurocentric, I sit back and go, well, I would be really interested in what more we should be doing, because we've done a lot of work. So where are we still having gaps? So I think there's, so if you want to reflect on that, or if you want to talk more, I don't know, even looking at work studies, maybe there's a work study that you could come back towards the end of the year and say, maybe, and not just even this one policy, but is there a chance to talk about all the policies? I know we'll be talking a little bit as we step into next year's student rep time. So maybe we can take a look at that agenda and see if there's time for you to share about what things you might take away from this year. And yeah, we've really stepped up what student reps do. And so this is a big, hey, by the way, what policies would you change if you're going to be the voice? So how then can you communicate back to students? Okay, that was a little bird walk, but I think it was a good one. Wanted to go back to it. Are there any further questions for students or for staff in relation to, just as, again, the coughing today, all feeling it?
Sorry.
Okay.
And it's back in the hiring world. And it was, you mentioned a stay survey. Can I just learn more about that?
Yeah. So Elena and I, Executive Director Sivadosan and I, we crafted a stay survey and also incorporated some of the feedback we got from a group that Elena has secured to do some PD with us. And that was very helpful as well as we crafted questions. So last year we gathered our baseline survey data. We had about 1,105 respondents district-wide, went out to all staff. This year we have since sent it again, and we had about 1,265, give or take a few, forgive me, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, respondents. So the total number went up. And we really wanted to learn from staff what is going well with regard to your employment experience and what can we improve upon. So we asked specific questions about staff feeling honored, that their identity is honored at work, staff experiencing a sense of belonging, what makes them most happy about working here in the ISD, what do they like the least, and what do we need to know about that? So it's really great content, and we are looking forward to crunching this year's data.
Is that something, and I don't know how appropriate that is that something we can know more about? Like, what are the questions? What are some of the sentiment? I think if I'm just honest, one of the feedback points we get often is you don't listen to teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle with where that goes in my mind, given the fact that what you just went through on a stay survey, the fact that the district continues to rank in the high ratings of employers within the state. So I think there's something to be explored there about what are the avenues and reach, how are we hearing and listening? How is the district hearing and listening? How do we get sort of access to some of that information? Because I'd say that's a topic that I always feel a sense of dissonance on. It feels like it doesn't add up to the actual data of what happens in that. So I don't know if there's a way to explore that topic of listening systems, engagement opportunities. I think that would be a helpful future topic.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk that through also with our superintendent. And as I prepare for a little bit of an update to you all on P3 too, that might be an appropriate place to do that. Yeah.
P3 meaning the priority
Area 3, yes.
diverse
for the
talent
acronym.
under the strategic plan. Yeah.
Okay. Director Coyne.
Just to tack on to what Director Mullings just said, I'd be curious too, in terms of teacher listening, but because I think it's a broader category, I'd like to maybe see if it's broken out by district admin, I think school board. I think I'd love to see what that breakout looks like personally. Because I think right now it's probably clumped into a lot. And so people might be scoring it maybe differently than they would if it was directed towards specific groups. So. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
So maybe just would like to say thank you. Great, really great student reports tonight. Just really helpful to hear the different maybe insights and what's happening at each of the respective schools that we have at the high school level. And then huge appreciation to the partnership between Elena and Donna in this OE on behalf of the entire team, because it is everyone's work. And so we've really made some big strides in having that live across the entire district, although we know we have more further to go, and we appreciate that feedback.
Great. So we start this off with an advisory vote from our students. Correct. So do we have access to that? Do you believe the district has provided sufficient evidence to meet the expectations outlined in Operations Expectation 16, equity? Thank you for that feedback. Now with that, I move to the board. Any final discussion prior to our vote? Okay, we have a motion on the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item on our agenda is 2025 budget update. Amazing to think that, yeah, we are in March, we're already thinking about things. What our work is going to be and going out. I will kick it over to you.
Can I just share a couple comments before Martin Turney and Mariah Banasic join here for this component of our board meeting? There are a couple of things that are on my mind, which is that there's just so much going on in the world of budgeting around us, both on a national and on a state level. And so what we have ahead of us is how we're looking at not just the upcoming year, but we're also preparing for how the outlook might look in out years. And so it is incumbent upon us to sort of bring forward all of the different variables at hand and at play. The legislative session is still active. We've had another cutoff in terms of bills passing out of their House as of yesterday. And so there's still a lot happening. And I'm excited that we are going to the day on to Olympia with our students on Monday. It's well timed, actually, I think. I think by way of scheduling, it got well timed, but it's just, there's a lot. And so I just have huge appreciation for the stewardship of how we're looking at our resources and making sure that we are able to continue to do good work and put the resources against where we have the biggest priorities. So thank you to our team for that attention. And it does take all of us to make sure we're stewarding those resources effectively.
Steven, could you maximize that slide? Thank you. All right. So again, Martin Turney, Chief Financial Operations, joined by Mariah Banasic, Executive Director of Finance and Budget. Today, we're going to go over kind of where we landed in the last year. So it gives us kind of the starting point to talk about 25-26. Go into some of the inputs and things that are of consideration as we look into next year. So some of that's going to be looking at the initial enrollment projection and some other considerations.
Thank you, Martin. Good evening, board directors and the community. Tonight, I will provide key financial updates focusing on our fund balance, enrollment trends, and the legislative session. Our goal is to ensure financial sustainability while maintaining high-quality education for our students. Let's begin with a 3-year comparison of our general fund balance. So our fund balance trends reflect the impact of enrollment fluctuations and funding shifts over the past 3 years. From September to December, the state funds us based on budgeted enrollment. However, in January, actual enrollment numbers take effect, causing a revenue adjustment. Looking at the green line for this school year, you'll notice a downward trend after January, showing the adjustment from budgeted enrollment to actual. As discussed in December at the board meeting, current enrollment is down 329 FTE compared to last year, and our projection was 0.5% above actual enrollment. Now let's take a look at this year's fund balance projection. Initially, we estimated $6.7 million decline in our fund balance, but the latest projection shows a $9 million decline. Several factors are contributing to this increased financial pressure, including the planned $6.2 million in curriculum costs to support student learning, $1.3 million in lost revenue due to the enrollment being 0.5% below projection, $500,000 in critical repairs for a middle school elevator, and $1 million increase in operational costs driven by inflation. These challenges highlight the need for strategic financial planning as we navigate declining enrollment and rising costs. Now let's focus on special education enrollment trends. Typically, enrollment starts lower at the beginning of the year and gradually increases. However, for the current school year, the light blue line you see there at the top, we see a flattening of enrollment since October. We are monitoring it to ensure that staffing resources align with needs. Additionally, special education funding is a major topic in this year's legislative session, and there's potential for sustainable funding to support our students that we'll touch on later in this presentation. Okay. For our local levy trend, one of the key financial shifts we're experiencing is slowing levy revenue growth. In prior years, levy revenue increased over 10% annually. Now growth has leveled off to 3% and under, meaning that we can't rely on levies to absorb increasing costs. If expenses outpace levy growth, we will face more complex financial decisions. This underscores the need for sustainable revenue strategies moving forward. Echo Glen presents another enrollment challenge this year. We rely on state projections to staff the school appropriately each spring. However, current enrollment is 96 students, 34% lower than the state's projection of 145 students. This shortfall is due to delayed cottage openings and an overestimate from the state. We are working closely with Echo Glen to monitor the impact on staffing and funding. Okay, and lastly, for the fund balance for 24-25, this chart illustrates total fund balance trends from 2018-19 to estimated 24-25 balance, alongside the percentage of expenditures that the fund balance represents. Some key observations. The total fund balance peaked last year at $52 million, but is now projected to decline to $43 million for the current school year. The percentage of expenditures to fund balance has decreased from 17% in 2018-19 to an estimated 11% in 24-25. This decline reflects the ongoing pressure of rising costs and declining enrollment. Now I will turn it over to Martin to dig a little deeper into the fund balance. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're actually now, so this kind of rounds out where we think we're going to be in 24-25. The bulk of that was expected, of course. Now let's start talking about 25-26. So we start with your board of directors development guidelines for the budget. Two key changes this year. So we want to highlight those. Setting aside $20 million for future school facilities, which when we do that, we call it a commitment. It's in the fund balance. I'll show you what that looks like in the next slide. And then an increase of the board designated emergency reserve, it was $1 million. And now we've increased that on your direction to $1.5 million. So we wanted to show the changes, those two changes and what that might look like for fund balance. So it's important on this slide that you know this is September 1st, 25-26, a projection. So we don't know exactly what our budgeted expenditures are going to be, but we project that. And then we look at what we believe the ending fund balance is from the previous year, which is this current year. And then we say, okay, what's that going to look like? And what is that unreserved, undesignated amount? What might that look like? And what it's indicating is that we may dip just below the board mandated 3% with those commitments added. So what we need to do then is think about how we're going to approach that in the 25-26 budget so that we can stay in compliance. So other things to consider. When we set aside funds and eventually use them, that can be a challenge to our operating fund, the general fund. So want to point that out. Also, again, if we're trying to adjust for compliance and making sure we have that unreserved, undesignated at 3%, we may need to make some adjustments within the budget in 25-26 to make sure we're in compliance there. And then, of course, we are dealing with some uncertain financial outlooks items, and some of those include potential reductions in federal funding. A lot of questions right now about what that might look like. The state has its own budget issues that they're addressing. And then we're still dealing with some uncertain inflationary cost increases, and some of them focus in on specific areas like insurance, where we can see those large increases year over year that can really substantially hit our budget. Okay. And we will expand on the 25-26.
Thank you, Martin. So we had the Board of Directors Budget Development Guidelines in January that were passed, and then we just had our second Finance Analysis Core Team meeting today, and we'll have another one in the summer. We also have had many cabinet mid-year budget reflection meetings with department leaders, principals, talking about as well as costs, enrollment, staffing projections, and then also always watching the legislative session as it develops. Okay, so for the legislative session, the key priorities are the big three: special education, MSOCs, and transportation. For special education, there are potential increases for the funding multipliers and safety net thresholds. MSOCs, potential increases for inflationary to catch up with the increase in costs. And then transportation, it did not advance, but there could be funding in the overall final session. There are also some other areas that we're watching: local levy lids, a potential increase for district levy limits, as well as changing for bond approval from 60% to 50% simple majority for pass rate. Okay, now let's talk about our projected enrollment for next year. This year, as mentioned, we're currently down 329 students. To put this in perspective, this is the size of a small elementary school. For 25-26, we expect an additional decline of 355 students, which equates to about 1.9% of our current population. While we're still finalizing 5-year projections, initial data suggests continued enrollment decline in the future. This will have financial and staffing implications, and we will need to prepare accordingly. Let's review how we develop our projections. State funding is based on full-time equivalent FTE students. Part-time students, such as Running Start, are factored in proportionally. Short-term projections are more reliable than long-term estimates. Projections become less precise due to changes in birth rates, housing trends, and economic conditions. Capital planning uses headcount adjusted for facility constraints and a 95% utilization factor for capacity. To develop our 25-26 forecast, we analyze birth rates and their impact on kindergarten enrollment, grade roll-up trends across all schools and grades, local housing, affordability, and economic trends. This layered approach attempts to increase the accuracy of enrollment forecasts. In summary, we are projecting 18,435 students for next year. Running Start participation remains high. We're expecting above 700. Kindergarten enrollment is expected to hold steady. The impact of open enrollment is undetermined at this time as it's too early. This enrollment decline will directly affect funding and will require careful financial planning to manage resources effectively. Now, Martin will walk you through our 25-26 budget considerations. Thank you.
All right, so just to kind of recap the 25-26 considerations here, obviously, as we mentioned, some uncertainty around the federal funding right now. That's about $9.4 million that we get annually from the federal government and those larger grants, 2.3% of our operating budget. So we're keeping an eye on that. Addressing the decrease in reserves. And so we had the planned decrease, and we want to make sure that we keep an eye on our fund balance and how we manage that over these years. The commitment to the fund balance we talked about. Also, we want to make sure that we sustain our district operations. And that might take a little reduction here and there to make sure that happens. We want to make sure we continue to align with projected revenue, what we see as the economic outlook and program needs, and then continue our philosophy of start, stop, and grow. So we review that annually, and we've had meetings so far this year with that focus. Coming up, we've got 5 bargaining agreements to negotiate. So we'll be busy doing that this spring. Want to keep analyzing costs, particularly MSOC costs, to see what that might have an impact for next year. Incorporate any legislative changes. Of course, it's going to be a little late for us to really be able to incorporate everything as the timeline to develop the budget. We're probably not going to know everything by the time we have to make some of those decisions. And then we'll finalize and get our fund balance projection down for next year. July, we will have our preliminary budget complete with a budget guide that we put out annually. We'll hold that final fact meeting, and then in August, we do the public presentation and then the proposed adoption at that last meeting in August. All right, thank you. Are there any questions for us?
I'm sure there will be. Director Taylor.
Just one first quick question. The federal funding, the 9.4 million, is that mainly Title I funding or?
Title I, IDEA, which is a special education. Those are the 2 big ones. We have some other smaller, but those are the 2 primary. Yep.
Thank you.
Director Coyne.
Martin, could you go in to detail? I know we talked about it in the facts meeting today, but the kind of the planning that you're doing behind the scenes, should the federal funding go away, should that 9 million go away? Can you just speak to some of the work you're doing just to build some backup plans around that?
I was going to go to a slide, but there's no.
Oh, okay.
There's no slide. So let me just talk about it. Yeah. So, I mean, here's partly why we want to have a healthy fund balance, because when things happen that, you know, we can't anticipate, or even if we have a little bit of a heads up, like in this case, it's good to know that we have that cushion. So that emergency fund. So if we become aware of a loss of partial or all of that federal funding at some point, if it's past the point of no return in our budget, you know, we can probably sustain that over the course of a year. And then we use that time to say, okay, what are the next 2, 3, 4 years going to look like? And what kind of changes do we need to make as a district? So to answer your question, in the short term, we essentially would need to absorb that in our fund balance because we need to continue those services. And then we go about some in-depth planning to see how are we going to react to this as a system.
I think this is important for the community to note too, that we want to think about this as more concretely, a potential sort of risk to out years for us from a budgetary perspective and revenue perspective. So bracing ourselves for the next, you know what I mean, beyond just this year, being able to weather one particular loss of $9 million of our budget while 2%, it's not insignificant. And then you compound that potentially over multiple years, that is significant.
Director Mullings.
I've got a few. Can we go back to the slide? I think it was slide 5. It was a special education enrollment. So this is the count of students, correct?
Correct.
But not, would the view of cost over this time be the same?
With the view of cost.
So this would tell the story that we see special education by student flattening, but my sense, or I guess what my feeling of it, and I'm asking for confirmation, is that the cost of that population is increasing.
Oh yeah, so there's a couple of different things. So absolutely, costs increase just to provide the services. Even if
Right.
we had a completely flat line, it would still cost us more because it costs us more because we fund more than the state gives us,
Right.
and that difference tends to get greater over time. In the past couple of years, we've also had another element, which is we had more students, and so because we don't get enough from the state, all new students, it adds an additional difference between what we get and what we provide and cost the district
Right.
funds. So
I just worry.
Yep.
I think there has to be 2 parts to this view, because I think without the second part, which would be the cost is still going up year over year, it maybe isn't telling the full story. It's like, oh, we shouldn't be worried about that impact as much. And so
Right.
I would just want to add that second view.
Sure.
Or add them on the same view, like whatever. But I think the cost is the thing that jumped out at me. Then I want to talk about Echo Glen, because I remember we had the conversation about the Echo Glen. I didn't write which number it was. I think it was probably next
Oh,
after that
there
one I
we
was
go.
talking about. We talked earlier months ago, I don't remember if it was this school year or not, about this projection for Echo Glen.
Right.
And about the fact that it seemed like a very steep increase that was being projected by the state. What I don't remember was, were we required to hire to their projection, or do we hold that hiring until the students are actually there? Like, is the
Yeah.
projection alone having us spend more?
Yeah, so we actually we get the projection, this enrollment projection in April-ish, right? And so what we need to determine is what can we do as a system to make sure that we have the instructors there for these students, right? So we essentially need to take that as it is and say, okay, we need to staff to that. Because if we don't staff to that, then we don't have
Right.
we don't have those folks ready to teach. So we effectively said, okay, we need to do this. We're highly skeptical, but we're kind of in a situation where we need to. We're not necessarily, well, I don't know if I should say we're not mandated, but we need to make sure. Well, that means we need contracts in place and we need people that are ready to teach. So we're kind of in that spot. Looks like Donna might have something to say.
And this particular last hiring season, I stay in very close contact with Martin and Mariah, particularly with regard to Echo Glen funding, because it is so peculiar and unique. And we expected to hire approximately 4 teachers. And when some of the circumstances with Echo changed, we stopped at 2.
Okay.
So we were very cautious and knew then if the additional cottages opened, we could always keep going.
Okay.
So we were very, very prudent in that. And I think it ended up working out really well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Open enrollment. So I know we're in the beginning stages.
Right.
All these questions are, but I don't remember. That seems to be my pattern tonight. But what I don't remember is right now, is that based on just certain buildings?
That is currently based on certain buildings that have capacity.
Okay.
And it's focused on our elementary schools.
Okay.
So this is our first year. And I will say that because this is our first year, being very clear where there is capacity, so that families know that, when they actually put in a potential request to enroll in the school district, it just is helpful because before that wasn't completely visible and requests were coming in. So there was sometimes a mismatch of the request and the availability. And so since this is our first year, I think when we say impact remains undetermined, I do expect that we will see a bump up. But I would actually expect that bump up to increase over the next few years because word of mouth, right, will get out and people will understand how to interpret the information we're putting forward about available potential capacity.
I have one more, which was the comment on, I guess, in the internal budget meetings, the stop, start, grow. My brain always says stop, start, continue. Stop, start, grow. So the question I had before you got to that exact line was is there a continual process for kind of evaluating and surfacing those programs that we do think are on the verge of sunset, needing to sunset? I bring that up because I think in the past where we've had programs that were maybe reaching their sunset period, we weren't as explicit in communicating that item. So is that something in this format, the start, stop, grow, that those kind of programs are coming up? And are those things that as we go through the budgeting cycle, I guess we can be a bit more transparent about?
Yes, and by the way, we interchange grow and continue as well in our own speaking. But we are much more clear in our planning phase, but then also in the communication phase of if anything is new, for example, or there's an investment coming online, or if we're reviewing something and we're saying this is actually ready to start to sunset off, we are getting much more clear about that and communicating that appropriately. Now, is it perfect? Probably not, but we're getting into that habit and we're building that skill of planning with an end in mind or a phase out plan or a scale plan, depending on what it is.
I just think that that's great. And I think that'll be really important as we move forward to open up those conversations earlier so they don't feel as surprising or we didn't know. Like, here's some of the areas, investments become easier to talk about. But where we're thinking about, I'll just bring up sports programs with declining enrollment. Like those are good ones to like, hey, these are ones that maybe we have seen year over year decline in students, or programs that were meant to build up skills. Well, we build up skills. And so at some point, how do we surface those? But I think if there's a way to give insight into that earlier in the process of considering sunset, I think that would be better. I think we've always done a better job of here we're adding, but not so much on the where we're thinking about reapplying funds or resources.
We agree with you, and we're all working on doing that even better to eliminate surprises, but also to preview where we're seeing either lower use or lower impact or no further need because it was a capacity building investment or allocation. Thank you for that and bringing that forward. That's really important and appreciate the affirmation. That's a good direction for us to continue to go.
Right. Ava.
This is just a question that I had overall. And I don't know if there's anyone else who's kind of thinking about this, who's listening, but when I was looking at the enrollment projections, one of the things that confused me a little bit is when we were talking about like redoing boundaries and overcrowding stuff, and I know that's its own Pandora's box. But I was a little bit confused because we always talked about how the rapid growth within our district would make it hard for those solutions to be like sustainable. And so I'm just wondering if we were looking maybe like somewhere else, or if I'm focusing on the wrong numbers.
I think some of the things that we've discussed is that there is a difference in what's happening at our elementary level, our middle school level, and our high school level. And that at our high school level, we still have the largest number of high school students that the district has ever had. The same cannot be said at the elementary level. And part of that really does have to do with birth rate, which will continue to be a problem long term. We just aren't having as many children being born. And the other thing that we're positing, we're not sure, but we're making the assumption that housing prices are so expensive that young families are not moving into the area, but that families with older children that have established careers are. So I look at the houses that are being built behind me starting at $2.4 million. I'm not sure that there's young families that will be able to afford to buy those without being in debt for the rest of their lives. So I think looking at that, what are other options to be able to get more elementary students within our district? And so we're looking at, can we open enrollment beyond the Issaquah boundary, saying, hey, if you want to have your child at an Issaquah school and it's one of our schools that has capacity, we would welcome being able to allow you to do that. So whereas before our growth was growing so fast and we had so many students, especially at the elementary level, that there wasn't capacity to do that. We're not going to invite you to bring your high schooler here probably right now. But yeah, so that's what's looking at. And so the fewer students there are, the fewer dollars we get, both federally and from the state and from our local levies. So every time we lose a student, there's 3 different pieces of our budget that are impacted.
And maybe there's another question behind that too, which is maybe Mr. Turney can talk about this. We were expecting a decline for the next couple of years. And so this isn't a surprise to the board and us, but we were expecting a decline, but we're also expecting a pickup in the future. And so we do, while we said that near-term projections are more reliable than far out, we also know there's going to be growth. And so our city partners provide us information with sort of potential growth plans in housing and sort of what they're being told by King County in terms of that growth. So we have to match to that a little bit as well, because with growth of housing units comes children. But I think our projections have been, we've been projecting the decline, but our projections have been pretty historically a very low margin of error. So if you can speak to that a little bit, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So the year over year, like we were mentioning on here, near term is a lot easier to project, right? So we know a dip's coming just because of like all the things that were mentioned, birth rates, folks maybe hanging on to their homes when their students are now out of our system, all those kind of things. The question is really, how long will this last? And when does it start to pick up? And what grade levels does it start to pick up? Do people move in with older students into our district? So when we see the increase, is it going to be mostly at the secondary? And will those elementary numbers stay like that? Or will we eventually see the upswing in elementary and in secondary? So, all those things are still in question because they're longer term questions. And we go through a process and we reach out to demographers and others that can help us with these statistics. And they will say the same thing, 5 years, maybe beyond that, question, right? A lot of things can change, and every time there's a change, it can ripple through your projection. So what we do is we do it every year. We see what the new conditions tell us. And then we look at developments, we look at other economic changes, and see how that factors in. So hopefully that's helpful in how we do it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. There's no action being taken on this, and so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Next on the agenda is legislative matters. That's a great one. Thank you. And Director Mullings reminded me that we did not take public input on OE16. If there was any, I'm sorry that I can't impact the vote, but we certainly still would want to hear from you. And she needs to be better at bumping me and making sure I ask for public comment before I hear from staff. And yes, and you're always welcome to send an email to us. And we read all of those. I may or may not get back to you, but our staff will certainly acknowledge that we've received it. So you should get that. I'm not seeing any hands, so we're going to move on to legislative matters. Oh, is there one now? Thank you, Cammie Cross. I do see that hand. Chris.
To clarify, are you taking comment just on OE 16 or also
Yes,
on the
just
budget
on OE
update?
16.
Okay,
Public
never mind then.
Period before at the beginning of our meetings. You're welcome to attend next meeting to give us public comment, or you can email us and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll move on to legislative matters.
Okay. It's exciting times, a lot going on. First of all, excited for Day on the Hill, which will be Monday, which, as was noted earlier, it's going to be an interesting time to be down at the Capitol. There's a lot going on, and I think we're going to have some interesting conversations with our legislators. So, looking forward to that. Few things to report on. SB 5263, which is the special education bill that seems to have the most legs in the legislature, passed out of the Senate yesterday. And significantly, to me anyway, it passed out of the Senate 48-0 with absolutely no opposition, which indicates to me that we have bipartisan support for funding, which is great and encouraging and something to be hopeful about. The bill calls for $2 billion in increased funding right now over a 4-year period, which will be impactful, I hope. So we will continue to see what happens there. On the MSOC front, Senate Bill 5192 passed out of the Senate as well, and is now, the first hearing will be in House Appropriations on the 19th of March. That would create about $120 million in additional funding per year for MSOC. So that would be helpful as well. What was that?
What was that again?
The bill number?
The amount?
120 million a year. So that's encouraging as well. Lastly, we have come onto our radar has been a bill concerning eminent domain and school districts' use of eminent domain to purchase and potentially hold property. That bill also passed out of the Senate, I believe it was yesterday, at a 47-0 vote as well. So it does seem to have some momentum. There is a public hearing in the House on House Committee on Civil Rights and Judiciary on 3/18, which we may want to give some testimony to, depending on our point of view on the bill. But anyway, it's an interesting piece of legislation saying that if a school district purchases acquires a piece of property through eminent domain, holds that property for longer than 15 years and then sells the property, they must give the seller, the original seller, the opportunity to purchase the land at the original price. So the trigger is selling. So that's something that we'd have to keep in mind. But anyway, it's an interesting piece of legislation and we'll see what the impact is, but it does seem to have momentum. So that's kind of the big updates out of the legislature right now. I did want to mention that legislative town halls are taking place all over the region, and the 5th LD will be having their town hall at Cougar Mountain Middle School on Saturday, March 22nd at 10:30 to noon. That also happens to be the same exact time that the 41st LD is having their town hall as well. So, and their town hall is at Bellevue College on the 22nd. Just offer that up to the community. If you have want an opportunity to interact with your legislators, that's the time. And they will be there to answer questions on a whole range of issues. I'd also encourage our student reps, if you're interested in also having some more interaction with our legislators that we will have just seen. That's a great opportunity as well. The PTSA advocacy teams have also sent out a call to action on those town halls. So you'll see some other information there. And I think that is the gist of it, what I have now, unless you have any questions. CMMS, Cougar Mountain Middle School, back in the library.
Is there anything on NSBA advocacy?
There are some guidance letters that NSBA has sent. So we are a national connection district. Actually, we're a cube district now. So we should have received them. And I think that you've received them also around immigrant status students and around Title IX. As you have probably heard, the administration is trying to make significant cuts to staffing at the Department of Education, although I thought I saw that there might be a judge that blocked some of that or some provisional workers. So I think it's going to end up something similar is going to happen with that. But about 50% of staff members were told to look elsewhere for employment. And I don't know how that impacts us directly. And I don't think that NSBA really has. They sent a dear colleague letter to the Department of Education. I do know that there are certain offices and certain things that are codified in law, special education. So the Individual with Disability Education Act is codified into law. So if it's not the Department of Education, or if it's something that's limited, that's still something that will have to be under them. To what extent they funded, I don't know, because they've never made 40%. Why would they start now? Why would they not go down to smaller percentages? I think right now they're at either 11 or 13. I can't remember. The very, very small amount that they fund compared to what they promised in 1972 when the bill passed. The other thing is the Office of Civil Rights, I think, would have to find a home as well, because that's codified into law. Now, some of the title funding and such is tied to that. So how would that look? So I do think that it would be interesting. How would you get to that funding as well? Because again, it's codified in law. But we do have to be concerned. We mentioned today in our OE16, we talked about something that the administration has said, if you're dealing with these things, we're going to cut your funding. And so I think that's going to be something to consider, that we're taking a stand when we pass, we say we're in compliance, we still hold these beliefs around equity, around inclusion. So what does that mean for us? And what is the administration really going to be able to do? Definitely watching what he's doing in Maine, and how does that impact long-term? So I don't have all the answers, but that's certainly things that we're talking about and thinking about at the federal level. And with that, we're going on to announcements and correspondence. And I don't have any additional announcements or correspondence. Okay. I do know that some board members have gone to meetings over the past since our last meeting. I know I attended the PTSA General Council meeting, met with the whole council. The staff was here, the district staff was here to talk about what happened with the bond. And so I was able to share during that as well. And I know that some other members have been part of some community outreach. So next on the agenda is calendar and future agenda topics. And this is the one I always wonder, like, how am I supposed to manage this? Okay, so if you pull that up, are there any future agenda topics based especially on our board retreat that haven't been captured? I think we have really full agenda, so anything you say is going to be either in August or September.
Mhm.
So nothing the rest of this school year. We do have a WASDA Director Area North Regional meeting in Bellevue on April 29th, and we do need to have a motion.
I move the board attend the WASDA Director Area 2 North Regional Meeting on Tuesday, April 29, 2025, from 6 to 8:30 p.m. at Puesta del Sol Elementary School in Bellevue.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Is that going to work for you? Done with me.
What time was it?
6 to 8:30 p.m.
8:30 p.m. So I'm available to be there. And the South End one is actually in Renton, I believe. So it may be something, but I don't know what date they've scheduled that one.
I can make that one work too. I'm available on the 29th.
The 29th will work for me.
Okay. Great. So we will have a quorum. So we do need to have the motion that is before us now. So then I will ask all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. So that can be reported out and calendaring's made. Senior exit interviews, just for your information, and I have not contacted any of them, although I do think I have some availability on one of those dates. So March 19th, Issaquah High School and Liberty are both doing it in the morning. Liberty also has an afternoon one available. And then Skyline High School is Wednesday, April 12th. I will be flying to Georgia, but I know that the rest of the board does not have to leave that early. Thank you to our students as they
Thank you.
leave. And I know this is boring for you guys. You are welcome to leave at this point too. We appreciate all your input today. I should have let you go before we got to this topic.
And I'm signed up for the Issaquah High senior exit interviews on the 19th. I'm there for that one.
Yeah, I can do that too. I haven't signed up yet though.
I haven't signed up, but I would like to sign up for Liberty
I-
in the morning.
I believe, I think Carlin mentioned he's signed up for Skyline.
This is March.
Right. Yeah.
No,
What time is it? 8?
Like,
It's in the morning. Yeah, I
Okay.
think so. Oh, I pressed.
I will not be able to do them. Let's see.
okay.
It's 8.
So then we received a Clark Elementary PTA invitation to an open forum for the Clark community on March 25th, 26th, April 2nd, April 29th, April 30th, May 14th, or May 15th. So they're asking
One.
us to come to them, or I'm
I think
unsure.
And it was one, I think it had landed on, I'd have to look, I had it on my other calendar, but on one of those dates, they were throwing out the different dates.
March
And-
25th.
25th, yeah.
and just one
Okay.
board member, right? Was it just one?
I had
Oh.
confirmed with Emily that I could be available for that one.
Okay.
If anybody else wants to join me.
What?
If
What-
they'd like a second person, I can be there, but. But I also love my days that I have nothing on my calendar because they're rare. The next thing to discuss is board engagement with high school student panels.
One
Um,
of the next steps from the board retreat was to get a recommendation from Dr. Shireen Carver and Sherry Cox about the best method to focus some of the conversations to hear from students. And so the recommendation is to do a small focus group with some invited students so that it's a very, not curated, but intentional space for students to feel comfortable and be excited for that sharing with you all. And the recommendation that we would also have it be facilitated by a social worker to help support that conversation, followed by just, starting up with some general questions and reflections from students, but then open dialogue and Q&A between students and board members. The recommendation would be to go to each of the high schools, maybe starting with Liberty High School first. And so the request would be finding time. Obviously, the best time of day would be during the week and during the school day. But if there's some general morning times that you could align on and agree on for 4 different campuses, that would be the best. And this is a hard scheduling task. I recognize that. So
It feels like a doodle type poll.
yes, so we can narrow that in and do it that way and bring it back forward, for a finalization confirmation
Right.
on the March 27th meeting.
I was going to say by putting it in the March 27th meeting that we would be looking at April or May for these discussions, which gives your staff time to prepare for them as well.
So if that,
But for us to look at our calendars in April and May, but I think a doodle poll is probably the best way
okay,
to.
so if that plan feels okay to the board, then that would be
Mhm.
the way
Sounds
forward.
perfect.
And this is for each high school, there would be 2 board members, correct?
However you wish to handle that, I think it would probably, with scheduling, it's probably,
We've done the student ones as 2, so they're not public
yeah,
conversation.
yeah. So I was gonna say that I would recommend that, but I also didn't know if there was additional.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Sorry, as I type. If I don't type it, I will forget it. That is a guarantee. I'm old now. So then the IMS IHS Town Hall, we received that. It's actually scheduled. So we received that invitation. I thought I saw it today. Did I not?
I don't remember
I
seeing
don't
that.
remember seeing that.
There is the Issaquah Middle School PTSA general membership meeting that's happening that came in after the posting of this agenda. This is the town hall that was discussed at the retreat as part of the board engagements to host a town hall at some point this spring. Yeah, for board to
Mhm.
engage with the community.
So are we looking to settle on a date for that? Or do you want to use that same doodle poll and utilize that
Double
saying if
doodle.
there's a time that we're all available?
Yep, we can do that. So that
Okay.
we'll get that forward and then we'll bring back the results of that for the March 27th meeting.
Okay. And then, yes, and then the final thing is, so Director Mullings brought together wanting to have a future agenda topic around board committees. And so I wanted to open that just briefly, if you could talk a little bit about what that is, and then we can work to get that on the agenda more fully.
And you may have to remind me of what the plural is in committees if there was another
I
additional
don't think
idea.
there was.
Okay. So I think the question in my mind of committees that using committee came up of how do we get a bit further in advancing some of the topics we think we need to advance and kind of working on them along the way. So the student rep program is a great example of that, where we're like, hey, we want to update it. And so we created a smaller group. Was I by myself? Was I the committee? I may have been the committee
did
of like
one.
gathering information, doing drafts, and then bringing that back to the board meeting for discussion. But certainly once we had a program that became 2 board members for the student reps who are then working on, what is the criteria we're going to use? How are we set up interviews, et cetera. So that's my mental model. And so the topic specifically on my mind is around this whole topic of engagement and how can we look at the changes that we are driving in the district and setting a more structured engagement of how we do that. So I think one of the questions that's come up in the last has been like, hey, the board makes a decision. Is that happening tomorrow? Is that next year? And I don't think we have a good published kind of, here is what happens to gather input that may go into policy making and how people can expect to be engaged. Here is the process we'll go through to make that decision. So it's multiple board conversations. Maybe it's first read, second read, third read. And then then what are the steps that happen post a policy change, right? We don't expect policies to change overnight, that there's implementation planning, but to make those things more structured so that we can have repeatable process. And I think my perspective on that is that will help increase some of the exposure to more deliberative conversations, participation in those conversations, as well as decisions that we know we're taking over months of time. We don't have a set way that people can expect to know about that or participate in it. So my suggestion was, is this a topic that we could address? I think a board subcommittee is one topic. We could do that as a companion work to some change we're currently working on, right? This is something that has to get done and we can do that kind of writing the process as we go with the next change. But I do think for me, really stepping back from some of the feedback and input and conversations over the last several months, I agree of the theme of people not feeling brought along in the process. I think what happens is then people apply a belief system into why that I don't think is necessarily always true or realistic, but that looking really at good change management principles and being able to set those that we can always leverage, I think will be pretty important. So that was my suggestion. And my question is, do we want to actually take that work aside for a couple people and start to lay down what we think that good engagement looks like, and then bring that back as a topic we work on then as a board so we can make progress? That was probably a long setup. Apologies.
But I think it's good for us to start thinking about that for a conversation, so that we'll put that on the board agenda. And how much time do you think that we would need for a conversation? Do you think 20 minutes would be satisfactory? Because we would be deciding, how do we want to build? Do we want to build a board committee? And I was checking, it's like our old words would be GP7. I don't know what the new, no, GC7. So, but that's how we structure a board committee that is more broad. And also realizing that even though it's a board committee, it will have staff support. What is staff's capacity and when? Or is that something that can be a committee of two, which we often do, a subcommittee of the board that goes out and does. I think most of our work since I've been on the board has been that subcommittee work. But it might be something that when we're talking about community engagement, do we need it to be larger? So I think it's a good conversation to have. If I put 20 minutes, do you think that would be a satisfactory amount of time to discuss it?
I will look to my left to see reaction.
Well, I was going to mention, we actually, this was several months ago, the subcommittee on OE16 around community engagement. We had started that work and we had been working with the district too. And we had two student representatives that were part of that too. So I wonder if that ties into that too. So I'm glad you brought it up, because I think it's probably a good opportunity for us to kind of revisit
because it did
that work, because we did it. We
died.
did some initial thought. Yeah. And so I'm glad you brought it up, because then I was looking at this and thinking, oh my gosh, this was tied to OE16 and we're just talking about tonight. So yes, I am in total agreement with that. And I think we could maybe bring some of that work back that we were already doing, because it ties into that too, in terms of community engagement and the further work of OE16. So.
And yes, I'm fully supportive as well. I mean, it's, yeah, I think it's important work.
Yeah.
So we've now talked about talking about it at a future board meeting.
And yes, I think 20 minutes would be great. And I'm feeling even more encouraged about that 20 minutes since there's starter work.
Yes. That sounds great. Okay, so I think that is there. And then you say you have something here and I have no idea where this is referencing.
I believe that the board was interested, or some members of the board were interested in scheduling an additional special session.
Oh, earlier.
We were really wanting more time from our special session earlier. And yet we had guests waiting for us with our ISF executive committee. So we stopped short of a conversation we were having. And is it possible for us to find a time to have continue that conversation?
If we all agree, I think it would be prudent, but
I think it would be too. We don't, our next board meeting, at 4 o'clock, we're meeting with we have a sustainability meeting. Arlen and I are part of that. So.
I think there might be interest in having that conversation sooner than that date.
Yeah, for sure.
Not just earlier in the day. And I wonder if there's opportunity to do something on Monday. I think someone was starting to talk that out, but then
I think that might be difficult for Director Mullings and myself, at least from what our conversation was earlier, that I think we both have work obligations very shortly after the daily.
Yes.
Understood.
I have to.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I won't be able to make the Monday
Day on
the Hill, so I won't be there either.
But I can manipulate my calendar the rest of next week fairly easily to make something happen.
And sometime
I think that's
during day next week is actually pretty good.
Okay. So maybe that can be a doodle poll that can go out more immediately.
triple doodle.
Yeah, triple doodle. Well, I think the one doodle might suffice for the two things before, but for this one to really, because also Dr. Gallanger's not here.
Right.
And I would want to ensure that he was able to meet that as well. So if we could do something with a deadline of getting back to Emily by the end of business tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay.
And is an
Very-
hour or an hour and a half the allocation of time we'd be looking for?
I would say 90 minutes. I'd
That's what I was
rather,
thinking.
I'd rather post it and not use it
Yes.
than have to keep coming out every
Absolutely.
15 minutes, asking for 15 more minutes.
Okay, and because we're doing a quick turn on this one, is there any times that are definitely not workable? It just,
Is it,
so we really are
would
only
we do it on
looking
Zoom or would
at
we do
the
it in person?
18th, 19th, 20th, or 21st. We can do a hybrid or it will
it's-
be,
If it's hybrid, I personally will make it happen whatever the time is.
Yeah, I'd
So-
prefer hybrid. I can't do the 19th or the 20th next week. I can
Okay.
do the 21st. I don't know if anyone has flexibility on Friday.
so we're narrowing it on the 18th and the 21st, is what I'm hearing, just to give us,
Yeah, I'm open both of those times.
Yeah. I-
21st, I could do probably after 2 p.m.
Oh, but I might be out on the 21st, actually.
18th.
18th's much better for me.
Probably better.
Okay, so it looks like we're rounding in on the 18th during the day.
Yeah.
okay, we will just give lots of
And then, yeah,
options and 90-minute chunks and hopefully that might also work for
Yeah, 18th
Dr. Gallagher.
before noon,
Yeah.
great. Before noon on the 18th would be amazing. And then after
I'd love it if we could do
2
the
to
18th
4.
before 11. Even.
I want to do it
better.
before 10. No.
Okay,
You might actually be scheduling this.
I am free 8 to
Actually amazing.
8 to noon.
before 11, we're
Okay,
looking
so-
at 9 a.m.
No, you said you have to be done by what time?
I need to be done by 11. I can, but I have flexibility before 11. The whole
Yeah,
morning. I can
so-
move something
Well, I'm
around.
just
We,
thinking.
3
in
of us
case-
before 11 just worked.
Yeah, like 9 to
On the
10:30 or
18th.
something.
Well,
maybe,
that's 4 of us before 11 works
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
on the 18th.
on the 18th.
Okay, so we will confirm with, that actually was pretty amazing that
Yeah,
that happened
actually.
because it's not an easy feat. We will reach out to Dr. Gallagher.
Perfect.
And because it is a special session, do we need to make some type of motion now, or is that something?
Because it's on the 18th,
I mean,
we would
can
want to
set it
give
down
advance
and-
notice and we can, we'd want to get out advance notice because we try to honor that, 48 hours, even though it's beyond the 24-hour period. But tomorrow's Friday, so that would technically be the,
I'm just wondering, do we
Yeah.
need to take action?
I think you would need to,
Yeah.
yeah, since you do have a quorum and we can adjust that if we don't
Okay.
have Dr. Gallagher.
I'm gonna say 9 o'clock just to give us buffer room,
9 to
Yep.
10:30,
9 to 10:30,
hybrid.
Yeah.
hybrid.
I move that the board meet in special session, executive session regarding legal matters on March 18th, 2025, from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. in a hybrid session.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
I
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
think that might have been my first freewheeling motion.
I have one thing to add. I'm sorry. The DA2 South is the same time and day as the Issaquah, City of Issaquah engagement. That's why
Okay.
it was not offered out.
Thank you. So that's a no-go on that one.
That makes that easy.
So with that, I don't know that, let me pull up my agenda. I think that's the last one. Of course, it just went
Mhm.
away. Okay, we are done.
Yeah. Thank you.
8:42 with a 9:04 adjourned, 9:05 adjourned.